I am the only attorney in private practice on this panel, but Peter insisted on saying that I was one of the two analysts, and I really like that. I've become an analyst, so every time I say something outrageous and somebody says, how you can say that, I'm going to say, I'm an analyst. Back off, I'm an analyst, which is always better than someone saying it's just another reckless attorney saying whatever he pleases. In any event, my goal here, and since I am the only, I'm in private practice and I want to make it very clear, I'm speaking here only for myself. I'm both a supporter of the concept of public financing, and at the same time I have been, from time to time in my personal capacity, a fairly sharp critic of some aspects of modern campaign finance regulation, and certainly also of some of the arguments made for it. But at the same time, as far back as the early 1980s, when I wrote my first and now deservedly unread book on the subject, I said that I thought the presidential public financing system, I wrote then the presidential public financing system had functioned quite well. And then, as Fred said, we've arrived at the point where the time has come to consider what can be done to repair the fissures that have appeared in that system and the problems with the drawing candidates back into it. But what I wanted to do here in the few minutes that I have is to talk briefly about what I think is an unproductive exchange that has taken place over time in the evaluation of public financing systems, the claims made both for and against it. It seems to me that we'll hear this again as public financing arguments now resume with the expectation that we can engage the broader public in this debate and potentially move toward reform. We're going to hear the same sets of exchanges about what public financing has worked and what public financing hasn't, or speculation about why it will work and why it won't, what we can expect from it and what we can't. And I want to register a note of caution and enter, for my part, a plea for some modesty in the way we think about public financing, which would make us no less ardent supporters of it, but I think set ourselves up for less of the sort of stinging rebuttal and ultimately disappointment that so often is encountered in this world. The supporters of public financing are not always, and as I said, I count myself among them, are not always very restrained in what they argue will follow from the adoption of public financing schemes. With all due respect, it's said that the debate will be healthier, more voters will be more engaged, the candidates will be better, electoral competition will be more robust. And then, of course, along comes organizations like the Center for Competitive Politics to produce studies showing that that isn't the case, which provoke in turn studies that show that in fact it is the case. And back and forth goes these sort of empirical disagreements, or excuse me, these disagreements which are on each side supposedly to be girded or supported by some kind of empirical finding of one kind or another. I find this debate to a large extent overdrawn and unenlightening, and I think that it actually plays into the hands of public financing opponents. I think that what we say about public financing should be, to some extent, carefully drawn to a reasonable set of expectations, which does not make the goal of public financing any less important. So what do I mean by this precisely? Well, I don't think the test of public financing is going to transform politics from top to bottom. I don't think any system devised by human hands or conceived by flawed human judgment is going to make politics over from top to bottom. There will always be disagreements about what robust electoral competition is, what strong candidates are, what constitutes a healthy debate, what constitutes an informed citizenry, what makes voters engaged. We will never have agreement on these points for a whole host of reasons. Politics will sometimes make us proud, sometimes it will make us less proud, sometimes positively ill. There will never be any great consensus about that which should make us proud and that which brings on illness. The goals that we set are oftentimes very subjective in character and ill-defined, and if we set the debate up that way, there's going to be no end of the disagreement, and there will be some cheap shots leveled our way, which are going to be hard to turn away, hard to refute. I have in mind some recent reading I've done of the studies that have been done about public financing systems on both sides, both attempting to make the case that it has fulfilled these larger goals and making the case in response that it hasn't. I must say that without minimizing the accomplishments of social science in this field, and they are many, that sometimes the productions here are very, very unimpressive. They frequently seem to be driven more by the results the authors wish to reach. They sometimes assume a bit the form of rhetoric in the classical sense. They're meant to deliver a persuasive, have persuasive impact as long as you don't look too closely at the substance. I would argue that citizens who wish to move to a public financing system, and as Richard points out, it won't be a wholly public financing system, can devise reasonable schemes with reasonable expectations and still have accomplished very meaningful reform. Yes, it will make it possible for some good candidates who otherwise wouldn't run to enter the race. Yes, on the other side, some of the candidates who will be drawn into the race by public funding who might not otherwise make it will not be good candidates. Yes, some of the money will be devoted to good speech, very entertaining, very enlightening, very informative speech, and some of the money will be spent on negative advertising that is sordid to the core. Some incumbents will be turned out who deserve to be turned out, and some incumbents will lose who deserve to hold office. So it's going to shake out a lot of different ways. But at the end of the day, what we presumably should care about is that with public funding systems, we have provided for the possibility that in some races, with some candidates, in some campaigns, in a way that would otherwise not be possible without it, public funding will make the difference between something that will be useful to self-government and something that will not be. So I'm arguing for our being realistic in our arguments about public financing so we don't draw out the opposition into knocking down arguments that are all too easily impeached.